If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Watch the next chapter, explore the other tales on this channel, and share this video with those who love a good secret whispered by time. Your support keeps these stories alive. See you in the next one. The letter had arrived without a return address, sealed in heavy cream-colored paper, and signed only by the insignia of the Colorado Historical Society. It lay on Ethan Gray's desk for 2 days before he opened it. He had grown accustomed to such invitations. Most were little more than ceremonial requests from local institutions, seeking a consultant to verify a rumor, or to lend his name to a grant application. But there was something peculiar about this one. The tone was neither formal nor casual. It was as though the author knew him personally, or at least knew what sort of man he had once been. They wrote of a structure long abandoned, perched on a cliff above the Black River Canyon in Gunnison County. The Ravenhall Manor, built in the early 1700s by a Scottish émigré named Arthur Raven, had been marked on no modern map and mentioned in no tourist brochure. The society wanted confirmation that the building still stood, that its foundation and interior were intact enough to justify preservation funding. There was a faint undercurrent of urgency in the phrasing, an implication that something within its walls might soon be lost forever. Ethan read the letter twice, then folded it carefully, as one would fold a challenge. He was not a treasure hunter or a thrill seeker, though many had called him both. Once, years ago, he had been a respected field archaeologist. Now, after a disastrous expedition in Peru that cost him his position in a colleague's life, he worked alone. He carried no institutional banner, reported to no board, and preferred it that way. Time and silence were his truest companions. He had come to believe that history survived best in quiet places, unbothered by academic committees and cameras. Still, there was a current in his chest he could not ignore, a pull toward mystery. Perhaps it was redemption he sought, or perhaps only the feeling of discovery that once defined him. The name Ravenhall struck him like a bell. He had read of the Raven family years ago in an obscure article. Whispers of occult interests, strange weather surrounding their estate, and the sudden disappearance of its inhabitants sometime in the 1920s. That old curiosity stirred now, blending with a rational historian's skepticism. He decided within the hour. He would go. He spent the next 2 days in preparation. His small Denver apartment became a staging ground. On the floor, he laid out his pack with surgical precision: compass, map case, notebook, pencil, spare batteries, flashlight, rope, folding shovel, climbing spikes, and his trusted utility knife. He carried a compact weather barometer, a habit from his fieldwork days, and a pair of gloves worn soft from years of handling stone and wood. The mountain weather could shift with alarming speed, and autumn meant short days, colder nights, and a sun that vanished before it truly rose. He consulted old geological surveys, traced the outlines of Gunnison County on a digital map, and compared them to a hand-drawn sketch from an 1883 archive. The Ravenhall property appeared only faintly, labeled private land, and marked by an almost invisible road winding through forest and stone. A dotted line followed a tributary that spilled into the canyon. He guessed it was the only possible route up. He noted how the maps of later years omitted the estate entirely, as if the land itself had decided to erase it. On the morning of his departure, frost silvered the edges of his windshield. The drive west carried him through the rolling plains of Colorado into the rising folds of the Rockies. Pines thickened, the air thinned, and the smell of cold granite and cedar replaced the city's fumes. By midday, he reached the outskirts of Gunnison, where the paved road dissolved into gravel. The last marked signpost was half buried in weeds. Raven Ridge, 12 miles. He followed it, the jeep bouncing over ruts, until the trail narrowed to a deer path. When the forest grew too dense, he stopped, slung his pack over his shoulder, and continued on foot. Silence swallowed him whole. The deeper he walked, the more the modern world seemed to fall away. The hum of insects faded, replaced by the rustle of dry leaves and the distant sigh of wind threading through pines. Every step felt deliberate, measured against the weight of the landscape. He crossed a collapsed wooden bridge, its timbers blackened by time and weather. A fragment of an old metal plaque clung to one beam. Ravenhall Estate, 1821. That alone sent a flicker of excitement through him. Few manors from that era survived untouched in this region. He adjusted the straps of his pack and pressed on, following the faint line of what had once been a service road. The terrain rose sharply, a labyrinth of boulders and roots. He stopped often, taking short breaths in the thinning air. Strange marks began to appear on the tree's triangles, with a dot in the center, carved deep into the bark. They were evenly spaced, almost mathematical in their precision. Not vandalism, not random. Someone had used them as trail signs, though for what purpose or by whom, he couldn't tell. He took out his notebook, sketched one symbol, and noted the direction it faced, always toward the north ridge. As he climbed higher, he noticed claw marks gouged into a boulder near the path, fresh perhaps from a mountain lion. He ran a finger over the grooves, feeling the roughness of stone and the faint sharpness at each end. His instincts sharpened, the old survival sense from years in the field returning. Still, the mountain felt less dangerous than indifferent. It simply existed, vast and unbending. By late afternoon, a dull mist began to creep between the trees. The sound of the river rose from below, a muted roar hidden under layers of rock. He paused on a ridge where the forest thinned and saw it at last. Ravenhall Manor stood across the gorge, a silhouette against the ashen sky, massive, angular, with a central tower that seemed to pierce the clouds. From this distance, it looked less like a home and more like a fortress abandoned by time. The path narrowed to a ledge carved from stone. Here, the silence grew absolute. Even the river's voice faded. The air tasted of metal and moss. He could smell the damp age of the place before he reached it. The gate loomed ahead, iron twisted into the likeness of wings, two ravens facing each other, their beaks almost touching. The crest above them read, Ravenhall 1723. Beneath, the hinges had rusted to a dull crimson, and ivy coiled through the lattice like veins. He placed a hand on the gate and pushed. The metal resisted, shrieking faintly before yielding an inch. He used a fallen branch as a lever, braced his shoulder, and forced the entrance open. The sound echoed through the grounds, a metallic groan swallowed quickly by the mist. Inside lay a courtyard choked with weeds and fragments of stone. Once there must have been fountains, gardens, statues. He could still make out the outlines of paths beneath the moss. The cracked bowl of a fountain stood in the center, its surface lined with green and black lichen. Around it, headless marble figures leaned at odd angles, their limbs eroded by centuries of wind. One still held a harp, though the strings were gone. He walked slowly, noting details for his report. The architecture was a strange hybrid of early colonial and imported Gothic, perhaps altered through generations. The walls bore scars of lightning strikes, dark veins etched into the stone, glimmering faintly when light touched them. Above, windows gaped like empty eyes, some sealed with boards, others shattered into jagged teeth. The main entrance stood at the far end of the courtyard, a pair of tall oak doors reinforced with wrought iron. The handles were carved into the shapes of ravens with wings spread wide, and between them, a knocker shaped like a serpent biting its tail. Dust coated the threshold, but beneath the grime he saw faint scratches, as if the doors had been moved not so long ago. Ethan hesitated. He felt no immediate fear, only that strange awareness that came to him in ancient places, as though the air carried a memory of everything that had transpired there. The manor seemed to observe him, indifferent yet sentient in its stillness. He drew a breath, reached for his journal, and wrote the time, weather, coordinates in a single line beneath. The house still breathes. For a moment he simply stood, letting the sound of the wind fill the silence. The mist shifted, revealing the faint outline of the tower high above. The sight filled him with a sense both exhilarating and somber. Here was the intersection of history and myth, the perfect convergence of everything he sought and everything he feared. He secured the latch of his pack, checked the batteries of his flashlight, and approached the door. The brass knocker was cold against his fingers. Somewhere deep inside the house, a hollow vibration answered the touch, like a heartbeat buried beneath stone. He paused, uncertain whether it was imagination or echo, then pressed forward. The door opened with a sigh of air. the kind that comes from a sealed chamber disturbed after too many years. The scent was immediate and powerful. Dust, decayed paper, old wood, and something faintly sweet, like dried roses long past bloom. Light from his lamp struck the marble floor, revealing a mosaic of intertwined ravens and stars. The patterns spread outward in spirals, worn but still visible. He stepped inside and let the door close behind him. The echo rolled upward through unseen halls, fading into the bones of the manor. In that moment, as the outside world vanished into the mist, Ethan Gray understood that his journey had only begun. The light trembled on the walls, where portraits hung in heavy gilt frames, their subjects half vanished under grime. The faces were watchful, obscured by time yet strangely vivid. The air was colder here, touched by the scent of stone and iron. Somewhere above, a beam creaked, as if settling under invisible weight. He stood motionless, breathing slowly, allowing his senses to adapt. His fingers brushed the surface of the nearest wall. The texture was uneven, patched by centuries of repairs. He felt the faint vibration of the wind against the windows. Every instinct told him that the house was empty, and yet he could not shake the notion that it was aware of him. He wrote again in his notebook, "Arrived before dusk, structure stable, atmosphere charged." Then, adjusting his lamp, he took the first deliberate step forward into the heart of Ravenhall. And somewhere far above, hidden behind the storm-thick clouds, thunder muttered its distant approval. The first breath of air inside the manor tasted like dust and age. Ethan closed the door behind him and felt the world of the living fade away, replaced by the slow, patient silence of the house. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom in a thin arc, glinting off marble and brass. The air was dry but carried an undertone of moisture, as though the house exhaled from its stone lungs. It was vast, cavernous, yet so perfectly still that every movement of his boot against the tiled floor seemed loud enough to stir the dead. The great hall stretched upward into shadow. His lamp found the edges of a staircase, a massive double flight of marble steps rising toward a mezzanine that disappeared into darkness. The banister was wrought iron, shaped into curling vines and feathers, each detail corroded with green rust. On the floor, mosaic ravens looped in spirals around a central emblem, a shield bearing a single wing and a star. The motif repeated in the brass door plates and the corners of the ceiling. Even in ruin, the place carried an obsessive unity of design, as though the architect had sought to make every surface part of a greater pattern. Ethan advanced cautiously, taking mental notes. The floor was surprisingly intact. Only a few slabs had shifted. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step toward the center of the hall, a microclimate trapped by the density of the walls. He swept the light upward. Tapestries hung there. Their colors bled into sepia. A few portraits remained discernible: stern men in waistcoats, women with solemn faces and eyes like unlit glass. Their names had been carved into the frames. Arthur Raven, 1781-1854, Margaret Raven, 1790-1836, and further along another, Charles Raven, 1897-1924. The last name matched the decade of the family's mysterious disappearance. A faint vibration reached him, the steady drip of water somewhere deep within the structure. He followed the sound through an archway leading to what appeared to be the manor's east wing. His steps disturbed clouds of dust that glimmered in the beam of his light. The hallway beyond was narrow, lined with wooden paneling that had warped in the dry air. The smell of cedar was faint but comforting, a trace of craftsmanship surviving time's indifference. He entered a room that had once been a library. The air changed immediately. It smelled of paper, ink, and the ghost of tobacco smoke. The space was circular, walls rising to meet a domed ceiling painted with constellations. The bookshelves reached almost that high mahogany, intricately carved, though many of their contents had collapsed into powder. Ethan stepped carefully over the debris of centuries, brushing aside a fallen globe whose continents had faded to pale shapes. On a central table lay a collection of objects preserved beneath a film of dust: a brass compass, an extinguished candle, and a notebook bound in black leather. He lifted the notebook gently, brushing away the dust with his sleeve. The pages were yellowed, but the ink was legible. The handwriting was precise, almost mathematical. The entries began in 1919 and continued through 1924. It was the journal of the manor's steward, a man named Edmund Klein. Ethan read in silence, translating the stiff Victorian prose in his mind. January 3rd, 1919. The master has returned from Europe with several crates of glassware and instruments. He has taken to the tower for long hours. Mrs. Raven complains of the odor of chemicals seeping through the upper corridors. She has forbidden the servants to enter after dusk. May 10th, 1920. The master speaks of experiments to prolong vitality. He calls it a study of somnus aeternus. I do not pretend to understand. He pays well. The storms over the canyon have grown violent of late. Twice lightning has struck the upper spire. The master calls this a sign of favor. Ethan turned another page. The handwriting grew shakier. July 4th, 1924. The household is restless. Servants have left without notice. Mrs. Raven begs to leave, but he forbids it. He says the house itself is the key, that its walls conduct forces, yet unmeasured. Tonight the pressure in my ears is unbearable. If this be my last entry, let it be known that I warned him the storm would come again. The final page was blank except for a faint stain, perhaps from water or blood. Ethan closed the journal and sat for a moment, feeling the weight of the silence. The concept of somnus aeternus stirred vague memories from his studies. Latin for eternal sleep, used in certain Renaissance alchemical texts to describe a process where life and death converged in equilibrium. Raven's ambition, it seemed, had been no mere metaphor. He replaced the book on the table, took a few photographs for record, and turned his light toward the northern doorway. Beyond it lay the servants' passage. The ceiling dropped lower, and the air grew heavier. He ran his hand along the wall-cold, damp stone, replacing the polished wood of the main wing. It was a literal and symbolic descent from grandeur into function. Old copper pipes ran along the walls, corroded green. Each junction bore small hooks where lanterns had once hung. He passed an iron spiral staircase leading downward and paused to mark it with chalk. At the end of the corridor stood a narrow door reinforced with horizontal iron bars. It resisted when he pushed, but after a moment it yielded, revealing a short flight of steps into the basement. The air that drifted up was thick with the scent of wine and mildew. He descended carefully, light sweeping over rows of barrels, hundreds of them, stacked to the ceiling. A cellar. The temperature was lower here, perhaps 50 degrees. Condensation gleamed on the stone. A network of arched alcoves opened along the walls, each labeled with painted numbers that had long since run. In one alcove he found something different. A workbench littered with glass flasks, retorts, and rusted copper tubing. The setup was unmistakable. It was a laboratory. The sight froze him momentarily. He examined the instruments with practiced eyes. Distillation coils, alembics, crucibles, equipment once used by chemists or alchemists. The tables were blackened with scorch marks, the air tinged faintly with the metallic scent of mercury. On the wall above the bench, someone had written in chalk, "Somnus aeternus," through the eclipse of wakefulness. He noted every detail, photographing each inscription. Papers lay scattered across the floor, chemical formulas, diagrams of human anatomy overlaid with symbols for planetary conjunctions. A mixture of science and mysticism, as if Raven had tried to fuse the two into a single, unholy equation. He found fragments of correspondence tucked under a jar, invoices for shipments of glass and minerals, dated between 1920 and 1924. There were references to substances like antimony, silver salts, and rare herbs known for their sedative properties. Ethan crouched, running his fingers across a cracked ledger. The entries recorded lunar phases alongside electrical readings, suggesting that Raven believed the storms over the canyon somehow amplified his work. The handwriting became erratic toward the end, scrawled with increasing desperation. He straightened slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. Something in the room disturbed him, not fear, but recognition. He had studied similar obsessions in his career, the late 19th century fusion of science and spiritualism, when belief in electricity and the soul had blurred into one. Raven had been no madman in isolation. He was the product of an era that had sought to conquer death through machinery and will. As he moved to leave, his beam caught a glint of metal under one of the benches. He knelt and pulled out a small chest sealed with a rusted latch. The wood was blackened, the lock brittle. He pried it open carefully. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon, the ink faded to sepia. The first bore the seal of a woman's hand, M.R., Margaret Raven. The letters, written in delicate cursive, told a story of growing fear. She spoke of her husband's long absences, the strange humming that filled the house at night, and her worry for their young son. He believes the storms are his messengers, one line read. He says the lightning speaks in pulses and that the house listens. Another letter begged a friend in Denver to send a carriage before the next thunder season. It was dated the summer of 1924. Ethan's throat tightened as he replaced the bundle. The pieces were falling into place. The tower experiments, the storms, the disappearance. He imagined the family trapped inside this fortress of ambition while thunder rolled above the canyon. He continued his exploration upward, following the narrow staircase that wound from the basement to the upper floors. It led him through a succession of servant corridors, each more claustrophobic than the last. Here, the house seemed to whisper. Floorboards creaked beneath his boots, walls exhaled faint drafts of air from unseen cracks. A calendar hung crooked on one wall, frozen on August 1924, the last month of recorded life in Ravenhall. The edges were curled, as though torn hastily. He emerged into what must have been the main residential wing. The contrast was stark. Polished floors, remnants of velvet drapes, chandeliers that hung like frozen tears. Dust covered everything in a uniform gray, muting color and shape. Yet through decay, elegance persisted. Every molding, every cornice had been carved with obsessive care. It was as though beauty had been the family's only weapon against the encroaching madness. In one of the rooms, he found a vanity still strewn with a woman's belongings, a silver hairbrush, a small bottle of perfume whose scent lingered faintly sweet after all these years. The mirror was fractured, splitting his reflection into shards. He noted how the cracks radiated outward from a single point near the center, as if struck by something forceful. Perhaps lightning had entered through the walls that night. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar, leading to a spiral stair that climbed into the tower. He hesitated, marking the base with chalk. The air here was lighter, carrying the thin, mineral scent of altitude. He climbed slowly, each step accompanied by a soft echo. The spiral rose for what felt like forever, curving along the inner wall of the tower. When he reached the top, he found a circular chamber with windows overlooking the canyon. The storm clouds that had gathered at dusk pressed against the glass, casting the room in cold blue light. The furnishings were sparse, a table, a writing desk, and an armchair facing the window. Papers lay everywhere. One notebook lay open, the ink smeared as though by rain. A final note was scrawled across the page. The night sings with current. The gate between worlds is thinner here. Beneath it was a diagram of concentric circles, with the tower at the center, marked conductor. Ethan stood motionless, the wind moaning through a crack in the window. He imagined the storm of that fateful night lightning striking the spire, energy coursing through the iron frame of the house, filling every corridor with static and light. He could almost hear the echo of it, the vibration that the steward had described, a low, resonant hum like the plucking of a giant string. The thought sent a chill through him. The light from his lamp trembled as the wind picked up. He noted the weak points of the structure, the window frames, the warped beams. Yet despite its age, the tower still felt strong, defiant against time. The Raven family had built this house not merely to endure, but to dominate, to look down upon the canyon as if surveying a private kingdom. He descended at last, his notebook filled with sketches and observations. The manor had revealed itself in layers: opulence, decay, obsession. The scientific and the mystical entwined in every stone. As he returned to the great hall, he paused once more before the central mosaic. The ravens in the pattern seemed almost to shimmer under his light, their eyes glinting faintly, as though the minerals in the tiles retained some trace of energy from the countless storms above. He stood listening. Far away, thunder murmured beyond the canyon walls. It was a familiar sound, natural and distant, yet it seemed to answer the rhythm of his heartbeat. The storm was coming again, as it always did in these mountains. The air already carried its promise. Ethan closed his notebook and took a final look around the silent hall. He had what he came for: evidence, context, and mystery enough to fill a report. Yet something in him resisted leaving. The house felt incomplete without resolution, as if one more secret lay just beyond reach. He glanced toward the base of the tower, where a narrow passage led upward again. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would return to the highest room when daylight returned. For now, he would camp in the courtyard and wait for dawn. But as he reached the threshold, a sound came from deep within the house. A low vibration, neither wind nor wood, a tremor like the distant strike of a bell. It faded quickly, leaving only silence. Ethan turned once more toward the staircase, his breath misting in the cold air. The walls around him seemed to tighten, the air heavy with anticipation. Whatever lived in the memory of Ravenhall had not yet finished speaking. He stepped outside just as the first raindrops fell, tapping faintly against the stone. The night closed around the manor, the tower a black silhouette against a sky charged with electricity. The wind rose through the canyon, carrying with it the echo of centuries. Ethan paused, feeling that same pulse beneath his feet, a rhythm that seemed to come from the heart of the mountain itself. Somewhere within the depths of the house, unseen and untouched, the echo answered once more. And Ethan Gray, standing in the rain at the edge of the world, realized he had only begun to uncover what the storm had left behind. The storm had not ceased through the night. Rain lashed against the courtyard stones, running in streams down the moss-dark walls. Ethan's tent, pitched beneath the archway, shook under the wind's force. Sleep came in short, uneasy fragments. Each time thunder cracked above the cliffs, he woke to the echo of it rolling through the canyon like a voice from another world. By the time dawn came, pale and colorless, he was already awake, staring toward the manor's black silhouette through the mist. The windows reflected no light, no movement. Yet something about the house felt subtly altered, as though it had shifted while he slept. He boiled water on a small camping stove, drank the bitter coffee in silence, and tried to convince himself that the unease was only exhaustion. The notes from the previous night lay open on his lap. The pages were smudged with moisture, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges. He read the last line he'd written before leaving the house. The walls conduct forces yet unmeasured. The words of the steward's diary echoed that same warning. It was difficult not to feel that the coming storm was part of something repeating itself, an ancient pattern the house remembered and obeyed. By mid-morning, the rain had lightened to a fine drizzle. Ethan packed his gear and re-entered the manor through the same heavy doors. The air inside was cooler than the day before, dense and unmoving. His flashlight beam wavered across the marble floor, and the ravens in the mosaic seemed darker now, as if moisture had seeped into the grout and deepened their color. The smell of damp stone hung everywhere, mingling with a faint metallic tang, like rust or blood. He retraced his steps through the main hall, noting how the wind moaned faintly through unseen cracks. The great staircase awaited him, still glistening faintly where raindrops had fallen through the broken roof above the landing. He paused, staring upward toward the shadowed balcony. That was where the tower passage began. He had told himself he would wait for daylight to explore it again, and daylight had come, though weakly. There was no reason to delay. The stairs groaned under his boots as he climbed. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the scent of mildew and age. At the top of the landing, he passed the portraits again. Their faces seemed more distinct now in the morning light filtering through the cracks in the shutters. The eyes of Arthur Raven appeared to follow him, painted with that peculiar precision of the 18th century that made the gaze feel alive. Margaret Raven's portrait hung slightly crooked, her expression weary, almost pleading. Ethan felt a flicker of pity for them both, architects of their own ruin, imprisoned by ambition. He reached the narrow stair that spiraled into the tower. The door at its base stood ajar, creaking softly as he touched it. The hinges were slick with condensation, and a faint vibration pulsed through the metal. The memory of the strange hum he had heard before leaving last night returned, sharper now, closer to a sound he could almost identify. It was not the wind. It was deeper, resonant, like a current running through the very stones. He ascended cautiously, one hand on the damp wall for balance. The light from his lamp flickered as though affected by static. The air thickened, charged with something unseen. He reached the top and stepped into the circular room once more. The storm clouds still blanketed the sky outside, muting the daylight to a dull gray. The windows were streaked with rain, and beyond them, the canyon was a blur of motionless mist. The room looked unchanged at first, the desk, the scattered papers, the overturned chair. But as he approached the center, his boot struck something that had not been there before. A glass cylinder, cracked down its side, rolled gently to rest against his foot. He bent to pick it up and realized it was one of the laboratory tubes from the cellar below. How it had found its way here was impossible to explain. He examined the desk again. The notebook with the concentric circles lay open to a new page. He was certain he had left it closed. On the fresh page, written in heavy strokes of black ink, was a single line. "The gate is open." The ink was still wet. Ethan froze, his heartbeat quickening. For a long moment, he could hear nothing but the wind. He turned slowly, sweeping the beam of his light across the walls. No footprints marked the dust except his own. Yet the feeling of presence was overwhelming. A sudden flash illuminated the room lightning, followed by a near-instant clap of thunder. The whole tower shuddered, dust raining down from the beams. The smell of ozone filled the air. Ethan steadied himself against the desk, his pulse pounding. It was as though the storm had chosen this moment to reenact the night of the Raven's disappearance. He remembered the steward's last entry. He says the house itself is the key. Another rumble rolled through the stones, and with it came that vibration again. Not merely a sound, but a sensation in the bones. A deep harmonic resonance that made the air itself tremble. The light of his lamp flickered violently. He turned it off, half in fear of draining the battery, half because the glow outside was now brighter than any artificial light. Through the window, he saw a bolt of lightning strike somewhere on the far side of the canyon, followed by another that forked upward instead of down, branching toward the clouds like inverted roots. When the thunder subsided, the silence that followed was immense. Ethan felt his ears ring. Then from deep within the manor below came a low moan, a long exhalation, as if the entire structure were drawing breath. He gripped the railing, listening. The sound traveled through the floors, through the walls until it reached him, a sustained tone that wavered between human and mechanical. The idea struck him that the house might indeed be a conductor, a vessel for the electrical energy of the storm. Raven's design, mad as it had been, was working again. He took out his notebook and wrote hurriedly, the pencil trembling in his hand. Electrical resonance confirmed. Entire structure vibrating in response to atmospheric discharge. Possible magnetic alignment with canyon below. His rational mind clung to observation, to data, but another part of him, older and more instinctive, whispered that he should leave. He descended halfway before stopping. A noise rose from the floors below, not the wind this time, but the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing faintly through the stairwell. Ethan turned off his lamp and waited in darkness, straining to listen. The steps continued, drawing nearer, then paused just beneath him. He called out before he could stop himself. "Who's there?" His voice sounded too loud in the confined space. No answer, only silence, followed by another soft creak, as if a door had opened somewhere below. He forced himself to move, descending to the main hall. The light returned weakly when he switched on the lamp again, revealing nothing out of place. Yet the front doors stood slightly ajar, letting in a thin draft of mist. He could have sworn he'd left them closed. He crossed the hall quickly, pushing them shut once more. The iron latch resisted, but held. He tried to dismiss the unease as imagination, fatigue, the side effect of long hours in isolation. Yet when he turned back, he noticed something that froze him. The mosaic on the floor, the ravens and stars had changed. It was subtle, but the pattern of tiles in the center had shifted, forming a spiral where before there had been symmetry. He knelt, tracing the lines with his fingers. They were cold and slick, as though newly set. He whispered under his breath, "The house is alive." The thunder rolled again, and the vibration returned, stronger this time, radiating upward through the stone. A soft glow began to spread from the cracks between the tiles, faint at first, then brightening to a dim blue phosphorescence. Ethan backed away, shielding his eyes. The glow pulsed in rhythm with the thunder outside. Each flash of lightning seemed to ignite the floor, sending ripples of light outward toward the walls. He stumbled, nearly falling, as the vibration intensified. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air. The tower above had taken a direct hit. The entire building shook. Chunks of plaster rained down, and a web of fractures raced across the ceiling. Ethan staggered toward the staircase for cover. The glow from the mosaic flared blindingly bright, then died as abruptly as it had come. Darkness flooded back in, broken only by the faint red beam of his lamp. The air smelled of ozone and burnt stone. For several minutes he stood motionless, waiting for the tremors to subside. When at last the thunder retreated into the distance, the house was silent again. The only sound was his ragged breathing. He moved cautiously toward the stairs, but his foot brushed against something soft. He looked down and saw an envelope lying on the floor near the base of the steps. It was crisp and unweathered, as though newly placed. His name was written across it in elegant handwriting, Mr. Ethan Gray. He hesitated before picking it up. The paper was warm to the touch. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, bearing the crest of the Raven family and a short message in the same ink-black script he'd seen in the tower notebook. You were right to come. The house remembers those who listen. The signature below was illegible, a swirl of letters that might once have spelled A. Raven. Ethan felt the chill rise through his spine. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his pocket, and turned toward the door. The instinct to leave was now overwhelming. He no longer cared to understand how such a message could exist. He needed open air, distance, and light. But as he reached the threshold, another sound stopped him cold, the faintest whisper from above, like a voice carried through the hollow bones of the house. It said only his name. He looked upward, his lamp trembling in his hand. Arthur? The word left his mouth unbidden, absurd, yet perfectly natural in that moment. The silence that followed was heavy, almost disappointed. Then came a final rumble of thunder, distant but clear, and the windows along the hall flared with a brief white light. In that instant, he thought he saw a figure at the top of the stairs, a man in a long coat, hair swept back, face indistinct in the glow. The figure stood motionless, watching. When the light faded, the staircase was empty. Ethan ran. He crossed the hall, threw open the heavy doors, and plunged into the courtyard. The storm was breaking apart, the rain thinning into mist. The air outside felt impossibly fresh, sharp with the scent of wet stone and pine. He did not stop until he reached the gate, where he turned to look back one last time. The manor loomed against the sky, silent and dark except for the faint gleam of the tower windows, reflecting the first light of dawn. He waited, half expecting another flash, another sign, but none came. The storm was truly gone. Only the steady rush of the river below filled the silence. He drew his journal from his coat and wrote, hands still shaking. The phenomenon ended at dawn. House structurally unstable. Activity inexplicable. Possibly electrical resonance between geological strata and iron framework. Personal note. The line between science and memory thinner than presumed. He paused, staring at the words, then added, The house is not empty. He closed the book and slipped it into his pack. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain back into the canyon. He could almost imagine it speaking a whispering voice, ancient and resigned. He touched the gate one last time, feeling the cool iron beneath his palm. Rest, he murmured, though he wasn't sure whether he spoke to the house or to himself. As he descended the narrow road toward the valley, the sun began to burn through the mist. Behind him, the manor stood like a shadow carved into the mountain, immutable and eternal. He knew he would write his report, file it, and send it to the Historical Society. But he also knew he would leave out certain details. The letter, the shifting mosaic, the voice. Some things defied the language of science, and to include them would only invite ridicule. The truth, he decided, would belong to the house alone. When he reached the base of the ridge, he turned for one final look. The tower caught the sunlight for an instant, flashing like a mirror signal across the canyon. It could have been reflection or acknowledgement. Then the light faded, leaving only the vast, indifferent landscape and the faint hum of the river far below. That evening, back in Denver, Ethan unpacked his belongings in silence. The envelope with his name lay on the table, edges slightly warped from damp. He could not bring himself to burn it. Instead, he placed it inside his journal and closed the cover. The city lights outside flickered against the window, echoing the storm's distant glow. He thought of the house, still standing, waiting, breathing its slow electric breath over the canyon. In his final entry, written before sleep claimed him, he penned a single line beneath the day's date. The Ravenhall Manor was never abandoned. It merely waited for someone to remember. And far away, on the ridge above the Black River Canyon, lightning flashed once more, though the sky was clear. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next adventure. Check out the other videos on the channel. There's plenty more waiting for you. And if you like this one, share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next journey.